Hi, Chris. Nice to meet you. This is Tom Needham, and
How you doing?
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No. Hi. You know what? I'm realizing the delay. I won't say as much. Just hello. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. It's really a pleasure, and this is one of my favorite films over the past year. And I'd love to get into a little bit of the history of how the concept of the film came to be. My understanding is that you originally started off wanting to just make a film about the record store. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah, I'll just launch in. I had this theory that I wanted to return to this fountain of youth, which was this record store from my past. Um, but as time passed and as I was gathering material, I didn't necessarily sustain the belief that the record store was a strong enough subject for an entire documentary. But it was during sort of, mid COVID when we were all kind of going through old archives and closets and cleaning things out that I was looking at a lot of old footage I had from all of these, incomplete projects or ideas that I started but didn't finish. Um, and we started to, me and an editor that I work with often started to sort of, try to assemble this stuff and see if we could make some sense out of all of it. So, it definitely did not start as what it ended up being, but it was the instinct to start shooting at the record store that kind of began the process, if that makes sense.
Can you talk a little bit about the theme of unfinished projects and how you had all these different films that you've been working on through the years and the connection between each of them that you made and the way that they all came together in this film, Flipside?
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of people that I know and in my life and in my world, that you try things and they're not always totally successful. And being a documentary filmmaker, one requirement of the job is you have to make a lot of run it at ideas. And sometimes they fall apart because of access. A person doesn't want to be the subject of it any longer. Sometimes it's financing. You think you're going to get some money and then the money falls through. And sometimes it's just a creative failure that you tried it and it didn't work. There wasn't a there there. The idea didn't turn out to be real. But as I kind of returned to some of this material, I felt like it still had life in it. That the Herman Leonard footage, that there was still feeling and ideas and material there that still felt alive to me. And that was true with other things like the Flipside material or the shooting with David Milch. And so it was in the idea was is can you have these characters recur? Can you make these almost collection of mini documentaries where that the editing can start to accumulate meaning, that each section, each unfinished project can carry some of the meaning forward, and that maybe the voices could recur. And I think a breakthrough moment for us was when we edited a little Herman section, edited a record store section, and then brought Herman back to sort of comment on something that was happening in that section. And that was kind of proof of concept that we thought, oh, wow, I think we might be able to pull this off, that it was going to be, a lot of work editorially speaking, but that it might be possible to combine all these disparate things to try to say something about the stuff we accumulate midlife, and creative failure.
One of the things that you go back to is the feeling that you had when you were younger, and I think a lot of people do. That feeling that's kind of expressed in Reality Bites, that commercialization is not a great thing, to be anti-establishment, and to make sure that you're an artist first rather than someone who's a commercial entity. But then you tell your journey. And you talk about how you go from that original intent to someone who actually makes his living in marketing and making commercials. And can you talk a little bit about your journey that you share in this film and how it relates to everything else?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's also a little naivete of youth in there, in that, not working for the man and kind of keeping your integrity. gets trickier and trickier as life unfolds, right? As responsibility grows, as I started to have a family. But it was a very Gen X sentiment of the time to sort of be, very suspicious of selling out, and anything commercial and anything corporate was dubious. And, but, I quickly found out that you had to figure out a way to navigate your life and living in a capitalist society. And that's a little more complicated than just making a living doing exactly what you want to do. So I think that, one path that I found toward making a living was commercial directing. And, there are many amazing things about directing commercials. I get to shoot with incredibly talented people in incredibly spectacular places, and, all kinds of visual challenges and different crew sizes and all that kind of stuff. But I think there came a point where the art and commerce balance was, got out of balance, where I was realizing that my intent was to maybe make one for myself and make one, for the man. But there came a point where all I was doing was just chasing the commercial work, and that I got a little overwhelmed by that hustle, and it's a constant hustle. It's freelance, right? So you're only as good as kind of the last job you did. So I think part of making this documentary was also trying to reconnect with making something that was examining ideas that were not about, profit or making a living, but just something that I wanted to creatively try to pull off.
Can you talk about the concept of hoarding and collecting and the way it figures into these stories as well? We live in an age, I think, where hoarding is such a derogatory thing. There's shows about it, and there's such a push for minimalism and getting rid of all the things in your lives, and yet it seems yourself and in the record store, there are people, I think I'm one of them, I think a lot of people are, who like to collect things and find meaning in it, but there's problems with it as well. And I think a lot of people enjoy this exploration in the film. I know I did. And I thought it was very clever the way you worked that into the storyline.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I think one thing that I think the film was trying to, think about was, what do you take with you and what do you leave behind in midlife, right? And that's both ideas like, maybe the naivete of selling out, and kind of how I had carried some notion or self-criticism about that for a long time, and maybe it was time to let that kind of rest. But it was also about literally, what do you get rid of? What do you purge? What do you keep? And I think that I had been holding on to a lot of stuff for a very long time. And some of the stuff I have kept because it still does have meaning. It still does define who I am. I still feel, not to use the Marie Kondo thing, but it sparks joy when I read an old letter or have an old magazine that, I remember I discovered a band reading some, obscure fanzine or some issue of Spin magazine from 1985. But, it can also get kind of suffocating. And I think that, I was trying to be thoughtful about, are these things just reminding me of how much time has passed now that they've actually gotten a little depressing, that I don't have a use for them, versus what's something that I want to keep and hold on to that still I get some kind of feeling or it refreshes some ideas or some sense of who I was then. So that was kind of the tricky balance between keeping and leaving behind. But I certainly wasn't judging anyone about hoarding. And Judd Apatow has a great line in the film, it isn't hoarding if all your shit is awesome. I love that line. And he he's a master accumulator, and he also has the space to accumulate. He's got an incredible office and home where he can kind of acquire more things. I have to be a little bit more judicious now. When I bring something in, I generally have to get rid of something else.
There's a little segment in the film that's a reference to Apocalypse Now, the edited sequence, Hearts of Darkness, the documentary. Can you tell us a little bit about what the significance of that film is to you, if it is at all?
Are you referring to the scene where I'm having a nervous breakdown in my...
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I will tell you a funny story that we were going to try to make that a little more playful and literal. and actually had till very late in the editorial process, we had the Doors song "The End" as the soundtrack to that whole section. And sadly, the Doors publisher is notorious and basically, said, $200,000 or nothing. And we pleaded and begged, and they, they told us to, to piss off. So sadly, it's a subtle reference now, and it's very fun that you caught it. I think sometimes maybe younger people who don't know that film as well don't kind of get that thing, but it was meant to be playful, and it was kind of this. It was funny to re-find it because that was from high 8 footage of me in my Columbia House office, where I would close the door and I would just play and experiment and enact these characters and these scenes. And it was kind of playful and fun and absurd to rediscover that footage and to sort of remember my sense of humor about that. It was meant as, kind of absurd, but it played nicely with kind of this breakdown moment of like, oh my God, I have kind of become the thing that I didn't want to, right? I'm completely overwhelmed by the pursuit of this commercial work. And so that kind of breakdown, it was our editor, Joe, that kind of, created that swarm of imagery and the kind of intensity of the build of that. And, it was meant to be done with a sense of humor, but also, it was a very real feeling of like, wow, this is not exactly what I imagined when I was starting out trying to make films.
I know when people make documentaries, they end up getting very close to their subjects. And you do, explain how starting all these different films through the years, affected yourself. But I would imagine in many ways it can be maybe disappointing or something to the people who thought they were going to be in a film and then it doesn't come out. But now they're in this movie. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what some of the different subjects felt like through the years and maybe how some of them feel about this film now.
Well, that's a really lovely, thoughtful question. I appreciate it. I think, right off the top of my head, I think Herman Leonard's family was always a little disappointed that footage was languishing, that it never saw the light of day, because I think they had hoped that was the beginning of maybe a PBS Masters, American Masters episode or something. And we had done this shooting with him, and we kind of walked right up to the moment of his death, and then also got this kind of, this memorial down in New Orleans. And I think they were pretty bummed. And so they have been super cooperative and generous with us. And, again, clearing his photographs alone could have sunk our movie, but they made us a really lovely, generous clearance agreement. And I think that, their hope is that maybe people see it and are reminded of the photos and go check out Herman's work. So that was a lovely outcome. I think David Milch is an interesting one in the sense that I feel very lucky that I got him at a certain moment in his, journey, as somebody says in the film. And I think it was a real privilege that his wife, Rita, let us shoot and come into the care facility. And, that was kind of a big deal. So there was a delicate sort of experience there, but I think it was meaningful for everyone. I think David really enjoyed being the subject of our attention in a funny way. He did that trick for Herman, right? He hired a documentary crew to lavish Herman with this attention. And then there we were kind of doing the same thing to him. So there was this kind of beautiful echo, that he was getting the attention of a documentary crew and our curiosity. I'm trying to think who else. I think Dan from the record store, while supportive of the film, is still a little bit suspicious of the whole thing. And my hope and dream, and I don't know if many people have stayed for the Q&A, but I would so love if you guys would make a pilgrimage to Pontard Lakes and go visit Dan, tell him you saw the film, and maybe spend a few bucks because that would be the ultimate thank you, is the idea that the film finally found its way in the world and actually helped him keep the lights on for a little bit longer. So that would be like, that would be such a thrill if anyone wants to make that pilgrimage.
You worked in a record store for a while, and you shot that commercial that was sort of, I guess, loosely based on a person like you, a record collector.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I miss with everything going to digital these days is that while vinyl sales are more popular than ever, I guess, in recent years, it used to be that you go into anyone's home, even if they weren't a big collector, and everyone had some records on the shelf and some books, and you would look at them and talk about them, and they were always great gifts for people. But now it seems like less and less people are buying anything physical. And I was wondering if you had any thoughts about that, whether it's a good thing, a bad thing, or I don't know, any thoughts?
Yeah. Well, it's funny, my daughter is a music fanatic. But the way she gets music, listens to music, accumulates music, shares music is all completely digital. So I have brought her to FLIPSIDE any number of times, and she's just paralyzed. Like, she does not know that kind of effort and physical labor of crate digging, of pulling things out and looking and sifting and hunting. And the thing about FLIPSIDE is you don't really go there to find something you want, because it's just too much of a it's an overwhelming experience. But you go there because you're going to discover things you can't even imagine existed. So you just got to kneel down and look in that one cardboard box and pull the thing out and find this obscure soundtrack from a movie from, that never saw the light of day, from the 70s, or some, it's just, it's a beautiful, just very special, unique retail experience that I think is loomingly obsolete, right? So, what I find interesting about my daughter's life also is, like, she's not keeping anything. Like, her correspondence with her friends is text messages. And I worry that there will come this moment where the phone is obsolete, or the stuff didn't get backed up. And this correspondence, like, I have, tightly folded letters that we used to pass in the hallway in high school and middle school. And I kept them in a shoebox, and I can go back and I am transported to that moment. And sometimes I wonder or worry that the digital fact of her life, and the fact that there isn't kind of a meticulous backing up happening, means that, a lot gets lost. That one hard drive goes, or one corrupt, phone, and her photos for years of her life, a diary of everything she experienced, disappear. So I still have a little bit of an affection for some of those analog source materials, like negatives, and being able to reproduce. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm not a Luddite. I'm not judging or condemning digital life, but there's beauty to the analog still, I believe.
Chris, one of the points that I love that you make in the film, which is pretty profound, is that you came to a point where, I don't want to misquote you, so maybe you can summarize it, but something along the lines of where you can simultaneously acknowledge that you have some regrets about things that you haven't done or that you didn't finish, and simultaneously be very happy with the choices that you made. And that, to me, was one of the most amazing points made in the film. And I guess it's a lot of what the film is about. But tell me about how you came to that conclusion, and what you've learned about that idea in this film.
No, I mean, listen, first of all, thank you. And, that was a little bit of a breakthrough moment for me, which is like constantly trying to figure out, okay, what am I trying to say? And I'm not looking for sympathy in this film. I'm not, there's no woe is me, I went down this path. I think I was trying to describe just some of the, the disappointments of and the challenges and trickiness and the high wire act of getting through our lives, right? And that you have a dream or a theory about maybe what your wife, paging Dr. Ford, your life might look like. And that maybe that doesn't turn out to be exactly true X number of years later. But, I think I was trying to express that a lot of adult life is that you are carrying around contradictory things, right? That you're carrying around a little bit of heartbreak, that you didn't make 17 documentaries in a row during your 30s. And you're not necessarily directing feature films, but my God, what a privilege it is to be alive, and I have a beautiful family, and I'm getting to reflect and consider all this stuff. So I think I was trying to just get at some of what it's like to be at this age and reflecting on these things in my life at this moment. Does that make sense?
It absolutely does, and I want to congratulate you, because this is a major work. I honestly think that, and I think you've tied together so many different things in such an entertaining way. You know, I rewatched your first film, and and then I looked at this film, and you've really, I mean, the first film was a hit, and it was, great. It was entertaining, but your filmmaking skills. I was wondering if you can just, and then I know there's people in the audience that want to ask some questions, but it looks like from making all these commercials and these different films that you've made through the years, you've really grown as a filmmaker and employed all kinds of skills in the just bringing together this story. I mean, I'm sure your editors were a big part of it as well.
Yeah.
But tell me a little bit about what you're most proud of in terms of your filmmaking in this movie.
Oh, wow. Well, that, again, very, very generous. And I also want to say out loud, and I don't mean to be sort of promotional, but the film is going to be released in New York on May 31st. So it'll be in the city. But the thing that I think is going to make a film like this live or die is word of mouth. So my hope and dream for anyone in the room is to please just tell people, tell your friends. And also, I'm on Instagram if anyone wants to say hi. I'm just at Chris Wilcha. So again, would love to correspond with any of you. But so the filmmaking, I mean, that is one of the absolute privileges of commercial directing, is you are constantly thrown in situations where you are filming at, you get to use tools and toys that you would never have access to, cranes and helicopters and, foreign travel, and getting thrown in, using crews in different country and working with DPs who are just, at the top of their game, because that's who's doing commercials. There's a lot of people who are kind of double dipping in that world, who have very rich creative lives and then, make their living doing kind of commercial work on the side. So one thing that I was worried about was that because this was shot over different eras with tons of different cameras and phones and, that it was going to feel collagey in a dangerously bad way, that it would feel kitchen sinky. But I think the spirit of it and the returning to the record store is a little bit of the glue that keeps it together. You know what I mean? So I'm self-conscious about how collagey this feels, but I feel like, I think that the voiceover and the sort of propulsion of the editing keep you sort of in it and keep it in the world of my sensibility. You know what I mean? So even if it was something that was just shot on my iPhone of my kid on a beach in silhouette versus like, a full blown shoot with Ira Glass where we had a steady cam and, it was a much fancier sort of undertaking, I think that those things have found a way to live together in the film.
Absolutely. Well, I think there are some people that are in the audience that would like to ask some questions, so I'm going to open it up, but
please.
Thank you.
I really like the film. Thank you very much for making it. I was wondering two things. What was the meaning of the scene with the girl doing her bat mitzvah? And the other thing is, what should we take away from the last scene where you finally cleaned out your closet, your room?
Yeah, the bat mitzvah scene, I almost wasn't going to include that, but basically what was going on there, and I think I maybe probably shouldn't have included it because it's a little abstract, but it was meant as a moment of humor, which is what's happening there is during COVID, my middle school age son was getting invited to a lot of bat mitzvahs. And the obligation was that you sit on a Zoom during the ceremony and that, he was 12, 13 years old and he had no attention span for this. So his go-to move would be to turn his camera off and then he'd be lifting weights. He'd be making himself a protein shake. And there was something so absurd about, I went into his room one day because I heard the sound of the Zoom and I walked in with my camera and then I tilted up and there he is outside his window, doing his weightlifting. So it was meant as a little commentary on my son's, kind of maybe, semi disrespectful, but, very 13-year-old brain at work during a bat mitzvah. So there was that. And then, I think the ending is kind of like a reset of like, I am now ready to kind of make passage into this next part of my life, right? That I've reached this midlife point, and that, I've gotten rid of a certain amount of things, be they, again, actual artifacts or objects, but also ideas. And I'm ready to kind of, take this stuff forward into the next phase. So I think that was kind of where I was at in the ending part, if that makes sense.
When you started this project, when you started this particular film, how long did it take you to go through the hard drives, figure out this snippet, that snippet, and make a story out of all these unfinished projects that you had? Because it's really just a masterwork of editing.
Yeah, no, and that is true. So, it's really hard to kind of nail down exact timelines. And the reason is because there was always, anyone who worked on this thing was always juggling something else, right? And this is the peril of this kind of filmmaking, right? Is you're essentially, you're balancing it with stuff that pays. And we didn't have a lot of money to make this, right? So I worked with an editor named Claire Ave Lemont for most of a year. And she was kind of a mentee of my editor, Joe, who ultimately finished the film. She was kind of a younger editor. And she did, I would just bury her in stuff, and we would look and sift, and she would make highlight reels and timelines. And then it was after we got something propped up and fleshed out that then the senior editor, Joe Beshenkovsky, came in. And that's when we really went to town on shaping, the kind of trigonometry of the edit, the recurring characters. And really, we'd gotten rid of a lot of material and kind of were committing to what was in front of us. And then I had a very close friend named Adam Goldman, who also composed the music, a very multi-talented guy. And he and I would sit in Google documents for hours at a time, trying to do the writing, experimenting, talking, saying like, what is the idea we're getting at here? Why does this feel cheesy or corny or maudlin? So again, your question was maybe a lot simpler, but I would say that was probably a 2-year period between working with the junior editor, working with Joe, working with my friend Adam, then convincing Judd Apatow to come on board and support the film. That, and then our big motivating deadline is we applied to the Toronto Film Festival last summer. And when we got in, everything kicked in, because what that meant was that we had a deadline. And that's when we panicked and we sprinted to that deadline of Toronto, which was in September. So I hope I answered your question, but there was a little roundabout way of explaining.
I want to thank you for the film. It was very inspiring and felt really personally relevant to me as a documentary filmmaker, and I saw it at the perfect time in my life, and it was just really affected me. I was curious, you sort of spoke to it, but again about the edit, and if there was any material that you felt really connected to, but you had to let go of it because of the narrative, or anything that maybe you want to talk about now because it was just personally meaningful to you, but just didn't fit within the film.
Yeah, I mean, no joke, there are at least 3 other unfinished films that were vying for a place in it, right? So, I could bore you to tears with what those are necessarily about. And some of those might come back to life or may not come back to life. But, I had this experience where I was shooting the band The White Stripes for a hot minute. And they were kind of on the ascent and about to blow up. And I felt like this is going to be my D.A. Pennebaker moment. I am here for the emergence of a great new band. And I was dating this woman who worked for the band, and I had access to them for a hot minute, and then we broke up, and then I had no more access to my. So I have all of this. I have beautiful material. I have 16 millimeter film of them. Was dragging a Bolex around shooting them. We're shooting them at different shows across the East Coast when, in very small venues. And then there came this one kind of pivotal, couple of months window where they went from, unknown to known very abruptly. So that was one that fell apart. I will be honest with you. I mean, I had this thought, dream, idea at one point. What if I could get David Bowie to sing that song "Slip Away" with Uncle Floyd in the store. And I wrote a letter to David Bowie's manager. And I pled my case. I knew someone who knew him, so I got his attention. I was willing to try anything. And he wrote back and he said, David loves Uncle Floyd, but David's not doing anything right now. And within 3 months, David Bowie passed away. So that was one of those documentary moments where your heart just broke, where, if you are a documentary filmmaker, please shoot people now. If you have an instinct to go shoot them, because life changes very fast. People aren't with us any longer. The circumstances change very quickly on the ground. So I'm still a believer sometimes in accumulating and shooting, even if you don't understand the impulse or the instinct quite yet. You know what I mean? That was a little bit of a regret. So, there was and I'll be totally honest with you. When I first thought of this, I thought it would be a great series. So the idea would be, you do a David Milch episode, you do a Judd Apatow half hour, you do a, David Bowie half hour, and you would have a collection of these things. But the problem is that would require time and money and actual, kind of staffing that nobody was willing to take a chance on, right? So we ultimately got to a point where I had tried to pitch it, and I wrote up a treatment and decks and talked to people. And it really just came down to, you have to make this thing. You got to make it, and you just got to do what you can do under these circumstances. And that's the only, that you could wait around for another 5 or 10 years for somebody to fund a serialized version of it. So I don't know if that resonates, but keep shooting and keep making a run at things.
Well, Chris, I'm going to close it out with one comment and one question. My comment is, I want to, I just wanted to applaud you and your work as being this great testament to the value of a humanities education. Since knowing in Target that you were a philosophy major, so I think it shows. I think it really does show.
Well, that is very sweet of you to say, and kind of you to pick up on and remember. And trust me, my parents would be thrilled to hear that, because at the time, a philosophy major did not seem like a on-ramp to employment. But I somehow found a way to, it's been a meaningful tool. I also had no idea how much writing my creative life would require, writing treatments, writing love letters to people to try to get them to do interviews. There's so much writing involved, and that's so much of a humanities education also. So that is very sweet and funny that you said that, and it means a lot.
And my one question, has your mother ever forgiven Judd Apatow?
No, my mother is still bitter to this day. There's humor in that, but I'm not joking. There's a bite in there that Pat Wilcha was genuinely felt that this was, a transgression, inviting me to LA, and that we, stuck around. I do have news to report, though, which is my daughter. We just passed through the crucible of college applications and acceptances, and my daughter is going to be going to New York to go to college. So my parents are going to have a lot more of time with her in a way that I think is going to be very meaningful for everyone. So.
Oh, well, that's a beautiful note to end on. Everybody, let's applaud Chris one last time.
Thank you so much for showing the film and for such a generous response and such a thoughtful Q&A. It really means a lot. I'm sorry I can't be with you there in person. And again, I'll be screening it. I'm going to come there for that opening weekend, May 31st at the IFC Center. I'll be there, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Ira Glass is going to do some Q&As. Again, send friends. And again, I truly appreciate you guys responding so thoughtfully and positively. It means a lot.